60 minutes before her career collapsed, Vanessa Cole laughed at a woman she thought was nobody. The irony was that Vanessa would repeat that moment in her head for years afterward, wondering how she had missed the signs standing right in front of her. It was a warm Friday afternoon in Dallas, Texas, and the boutique shimmered beneath soft lighting designed to make every handbag, dress, and pair of shoes look even more expensive than they already were. Wealthy shoppers moved through the store carrying sparkling shopping bags while sales associates floated between them offering compliments, bottled water, and personalized service. Everything inside the boutique communicated status. Everything except the woman who had just stepped through the front door. Abigail Carter paused near the entrance and glanced around quietly. She wore worn leatherwork boots, blue jeans, and a simple plaid shirt rolled at the sleeves. Her light brown hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail. To most people, she looked less like a luxury customer and more like someone who had stopped by after working on a ranch. Outside, parked along the curb between luxury vehicles, sat an older pickup truck coated with a thin layer of Texas dust. The contrast drew attention immediately. Vanessa noticed it from behind the front counter and exchanged a glance with Brittany Shaw. Neither woman said anything at first. They did not have to. The look communicated everything. Abigail slowly examined a display of designer handbags. No associate approached her. Moments later, another customer entered wearing a tailored business suit. Brittany immediately walked over with a bright smile. "Welcome back. Let me show you our newest collection." Abigail remained alone beside the display. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Employees moved around her as if she were invisible. She picked up a handbag and carefully inspected the stitching. Nearby, 2 associates discussed weekend plans while pretending not to notice her. The boutique's atmosphere remained polished and pleasant, but the message was clear. Some customers mattered more than others. Abigail never complained. She simply continued browsing. A few minutes later, she approached a display case containing limited edition accessories. "Excuse me," she said politely. "Could someone unlock this section?" Brittany looked at the case, then at Abigail's boots. "Those pieces start at $5,000, she replied with a practiced smile. "You may prefer our seasonal collection near the back." Abigail blinked once. I asked if someone could unlock the case. Brittany's smile tightened. Across the room, Vanessa watched the interaction with growing amusement. Around them, other shoppers continued browsing without realizing they were witnessing the first moments of a disaster already set in motion. Because while everyone in the boutique saw a country woman in dusty boots, nobody recognized the person standing quietly among them. And as the clock continued ticking toward the next 60 minutes, every assumption inside that store was moving closer to a very expensive collision with reality. Abigail Carter had spent most of her life around people who underestimated her. Growing up on a cattle ranch outside Fort Worth taught her that some individuals judged value the same way they judged a fence post. If it looked rough on the outside, they assumed it had little worth. Experience had taught her otherwise. That was one reason she never rushed to correct assumptions. Inside the boutique, she moved calmly from one display to another while employees continued serving customers they considered more important. A woman wearing designer sunglasses received a personal consultation. Another shopper was offered champagne while browsing handbags. Meanwhile, Abigail stood alone examining merchandise worth thousands of dollars without receiving even basic assistance. The contrast was impossible to miss, yet she appeared completely unbothered. Near the center of the showroom, a glass display featured a limited collection of luxury handbags created by one of the company's most celebrated designers. Abigail studied the craftsmanship with genuine interest. She appreciated quality. Whether it came from handcrafted leather, well-built ranch equipment, or strong business leadership, excellence always attracted her attention. She reached toward a display card describing the collection when a sales associate quickly stepped in front of her. "Those pieces are reserved for serious buyers," Nicole Hayes said politely, though her tone carried a different message. Abigail lowered her hand. "I was reading the information card." Nicole forced a smile. "Of course." Then she walked away before Abigail could say anything else. Across the room, Vanessa observed the exchange and shook her head slightly. To her, Abigail represented a familiar type of customer. Someone who entered luxury spaces hoping to experience them without actually purchasing anything. Vanessa believed she could identify those customers within seconds. She considered it one of her strengths. The fact that she had never spoken to Abigail beyond a few brief words did not seem important. Confidence often convinces people they know more than they actually do. Outside, traffic moved steadily along the busy Dallas street. Inside, the boutique continued operating with polished efficiency. Yet small details were beginning to emerge. Abigail's phone vibrated once. She glanced at the screen before declining the call. Minutes later, it vibrated again. This time, she answered quietly. "Hello." Her voice remained calm. On the other end, someone sounded concerned. "Ma'am, the board is waiting for confirmation regarding this afternoon's meeting." Abigail looked toward the front windows. "I know. I will be there shortly. They would prefer an update as soon as possible. Tell them I am running a little behind." "Yes, ma'am." The call ended. Nearby, Brittany overheard only a few words. She rolled her eyes. The conversation sounded important, but she assumed it was nothing more than someone trying to appear influential. Abigail slipped the phone back into her pocket and continued browsing. 15 minutes had passed since she entered the store. 45 remained. Around her, employees continued making assumptions. Customers continued receiving special treatment based on appearances. Vanessa continued believing she understood exactly who Abigail Carter was. The irony was almost invisible, because while the boutique manager saw a country woman in dusty boots, people in corporate offices across Texas were currently delaying major decisions until that same woman arrived. And before the next hour ended, everyone inside the boutique would learn just how wrong first impressions can be. The next 20 minutes revealed just how invisible Abigail had become inside the boutique. Customers arrived and left. Purchases were wrapped in elegant boxes tied with satin ribbons. Associates moved through the showroom offering recommendations, compliments, and personalized attention. Yet somehow, every employee managed to walk around Abigail without ever truly seeing her. She examined a leather handbag displayed beneath a spotlight and waited patiently for assistance. Nobody came. Eventually, she approached the counter herself. "I would like to compare 2 colors of this model," she said politely. Brittany glanced at the item in Abigail's hand before looking toward a woman dressed in designer clothing entering the boutique. "I will be with you in a moment." The moment never arrived. 5 minutes later, Brittany was helping the new customer select accessories, while Abigail remained standing alone. Nearby, 2 shoppers noticed the situation. One exchanged an uncomfortable look with the other, but said nothing. Most people prefer avoiding awkward moments when they are not directly involved. Abigail simply returned the handbag to its display and continued browsing. Her calmness only strengthened the assumptions surrounding her. Vanessa interpreted it as proof that Abigail was not a serious customer. Nicole viewed it as confirmation that serving other people represented a better use of time. None of them realized they were making decisions based entirely on appearances. At one point, Abigail stopped near a collection of limited edition jackets. A small card beside the display identified the pieces as part of an exclusive seasonal release. She reached for one and carefully inspected the craftsmanship. "Those are very expensive," Nicole said from several feet away. Abigail glanced toward her. "I can see that." Nicole smiled. "Most people just enjoy looking at them." The comment floated through the air longer than intended. A nearby customer looked down at the floor. Another shifted uncomfortably. Abigail simply returned the jacket to its hanger. "It is excellent workmanship," she replied. Then she moved on. The interaction should have ended there. Instead, it became another small step toward a much larger mistake. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the Texas sky. Inside, the boutique's atmosphere remained polished and sophisticated. Yet beneath the surface, the culture revealed itself more clearly with each passing minute. Respect appeared to be offered selectively. Courtesy seemed connected to clothing labels and perceived wealth. Abigail noticed all of it. She simply chose not to react. Her phone vibrated again. This time she stepped near the front windows before answering. "Yes." A familiar voice spoke immediately. "Ma'am, Mr. Lawson has arrived. The board meeting cannot begin until you are present." Abigail glanced at her watch. "Tell Richard the First will be there shortly." He asked if everything is all right. Abigail smiled faintly. "Everything is fine." She ended the call and slipped the phone away. From across the showroom, Vanessa watched carefully. Something about the conversation bothered her, though she could not explain why. Perhaps it was the confidence in Abigail's voice. Perhaps it was the way she never appeared embarrassed despite the treatment she received. Whatever the reason, a small feeling of uncertainty began forming in the back of Vanessa's mind. It was the first crack in a belief she had considered unquestionable. And before the next 40 minutes passed, that crack was about to become impossible to ignore. By the time Abigail had been inside the boutique for nearly 30 minutes, the atmosphere around her had shifted from neglect to something far more deliberate. What began as indifference was becoming public disrespect. The showroom remained busy as affluent customers moved between displays carrying designer bags and discussing weekend plans. Vanessa stood near the center of the floor greeting regular clients with polished enthusiasm, while Brittany and Nicole continued providing attentive service to anyone they considered worthy of it. Abigail quietly approached a display featuring a newly released collection of luxury handbags positioned beneath soft spotlighting. After examining one piece, she carried it toward the counter and waited. Several minutes passed. No one acknowledged her presence. Finally, Vanessa walked over. "Can I help you?" she asked. The question sounded professional, but her expression suggested otherwise. Abigail smiled politely. "I would like to see the matching accessories for this collection." Vanessa glanced at the handbag and then at Abigail's work boots. "Those accessories are custom order items." Abigail nodded. "That is fine." Vanessa folded her arms. "Most customers purchasing from this collection schedule appointments in advance." The implication was obvious. A nearby couple exchanged glances. Abigail remained calm. "I was not aware an appointment was required." Vanessa smiled thinly. "Not required. Recommended." The silence that followed felt uncomfortable. Abigail set the handbag carefully on the counter. "Could someone still show me the accessories?" Vanessa hesitated before answering. "Honestly, I would hate for you to waste your time. Some of these items are extremely expensive." Several shoppers within earshot looked up. One woman paused in the middle of a conversation. A hush settled over the immediate area. Abigail studied Vanessa for a moment. "How expensive?" Vanessa gave a small laugh. "Many pieces cost more than a vehicle." A few people smiled awkwardly. Brittany looked down, trying not to laugh openly. Nicole pretended to rearrange a display while listening closely. The comment landed exactly as Vanessa intended. It was not loud enough to cause a scene, yet public enough to embarrass its target. Abigail simply nodded. "I see." Vanessa continued. "We also have some beautiful seasonal products in a more accessible price range." The room grew even quieter. Everyone understood what was happening. Abigail looked toward the display cases surrounding the showroom. Her expression never changed. There was no anger, no humiliation, no attempt to defend herself. That calmness only made the situation feel stranger. One older customer standing nearby frowned slightly. Another customer lowered her eyes. Even among strangers, disrespect has a way of making people uncomfortable. Vanessa, however, interpreted Abigail's silence as surrender. She believed the interaction was finished. What she failed to notice was the subtle shift occurring around her. The boutique employees still saw a country woman they considered unimportant, but others were beginning to notice something different. Abigail carried herself with the confidence of someone who never needed approval from a room full of strangers. And as she quietly turned away from the counter, the clock continued moving forward. 30 minutes remained. The mistake Vanessa believed was harmless had just become impossible to undo. Abigail walked toward the front windows and stood quietly beside a display of luxury travel bags. The boutique continued operating as though nothing unusual had happened. Customers browsed. Associates smiled. Soft music floated through the showroom. Yet beneath the polished surface, small cracks were beginning to appear. Vanessa returned to the counter feeling pleased with herself. In her mind, she had protected the store from wasting time on someone she believed would never make a purchase. The confidence felt comforting. It also happened to be completely wrong. A few minutes later, Abigail's phone rang again. This time the call carried a different urgency. She answered immediately. "Hello." The voice on the other end sounded relieved. "Ma'am, we finally located the regional reports. Mr. Lawson is asking whether the review should proceed without you." Abigail glanced toward the boutique floor. "No, tell him to wait. The executive team is already assembled." "I understand. Several department heads have arrived from headquarters." Abigail smiled faintly. "Then they can wait a little longer." "Yes, ma'am." The call ended. Nearby, an older customer sitting in a lounge chair had overheard enough to become curious. She studied Abigail for several seconds before returning to her magazine. Something about the conversation did not fit the image everyone else seemed determined to believe. Across the showroom, Vanessa noticed the exchange. A small feeling of unease returned. The woman never appeared embarrassed. She never looked intimidated. Most people who experience public dismissal either left or complained. Abigail did neither. Instead, she behaved as though none of it mattered. 25 minutes remained. Then another unexpected detail emerged. The boutique's assistant manager hurried from the back office carrying a tablet. Her expression looked unusually tense. She approached Vanessa and lowered her voice. "Corporate has been trying to reach the store." Vanessa frowned. "About what?" "They would not tell me." "Who called?" "Headquarters." Vanessa immediately straightened. Calls from headquarters rarely happened without reason. What did they want? They asked whether everything was operating normally. Vanessa glanced around the boutique. "Of course it is." The assistant manager hesitated. "They also asked if any executive visitors had arrived." Vanessa laughed softly. "Why would executives come here without notice?" The assistant manager shook her head. "I do not know." The conversation ended, but the tension remained. 15 minutes later, another call arrived. Then another. Each one increased the sense that something important was unfolding somewhere beyond the boutique walls. Employees began whispering among themselves. Even Brittany looked distracted. Meanwhile, Abigail calmly examined a display of leather accessories as though she had nowhere else to be. The contrast was remarkable. The people with the least information appeared the most anxious. The one person who understood exactly what was happening appeared completely relaxed. Outside, a black executive vehicle turned onto the street and slowed near the entrance. A second vehicle followed behind it. Neither Vanessa nor her staff noticed. Not yet. But the countdown was entering its final stage. And for the first time that afternoon, the people inside the boutique were about to discover that the woman they had treated like an inconvenience was connected to a world far larger than they ever imagined. 20 minutes remained. What nobody inside the boutique realized was that a completely different atmosphere existed several miles away at corporate headquarters. In a glass-walled executive conference room overlooking downtown Dallas, department heads, regional directors, and senior executives sat waiting around a polished table. Financial reports were open. Presentation screens glowed softly. Yet the meeting had not begun. The reason was simple. One person had not arrived. Richard Lawson stood near the window, checking his watch for the third time in less than 5 minutes. As chief executive officer, he was not known for impatience. Today was different. "Any update?" one executive asked. Richard nodded. "She is finishing something first." Nobody questioned who he meant. Everyone in the room already knew. They simply waited. Back at the boutique, Vanessa's confidence continued fading. The calls from headquarters had become impossible to ignore. The assistant manager approached again, carrying a nervous expression. "Corporate just called for the 4th time." Vanessa frowned. "What now?" They asked whether any special guests had visited today. Vanessa felt a strange sensation settle in her stomach. Did they say why? No. The answer provided little comfort. Around them, employees exchanged increasingly anxious looks. Brittany stopped pretending everything was normal. Nicole checked the front entrance every few minutes. Something important was happening. Nobody understood what. Abigail, meanwhile, appeared entirely unaffected. She stood near a display of luxury travel accessories, calmly examining a handcrafted leather bag. The same woman who had been ignored, dismissed, and publicly embarrassed now seemed to be the least worried person in the building. That contrast did not escape Vanessa's attention. For the first time, she found herself studying Abigail instead of judging her. The confidence, the patience, the complete absence of insecurity. None of it fit the image Vanessa had created in her mind. Then movement outside the boutique finally drew attention. A black executive vehicle stopped at the curb. Seconds later, a second vehicle arrived behind it. Employees near the entrance exchanged curious looks. Customers glanced toward the windows. The doors opened. Several professionally dressed individuals stepped onto the sidewalk. Vanessa immediately recognized one of them. Her heart skipped. Regional leadership almost never visited stores without advance notice. Yet here they were, walking directly toward the entrance. The boutique felt noticeably quieter. Brittany straightened her posture. Nicole hurried to organize a nearby display. Vanessa moved toward the front with a rehearsed smile already forming. The doors opened. The visitors entered. Every employee suddenly looked alert. Yet something unexpected happened. None of the executives stopped to greet Vanessa. None asked about sales figures. None requested a tour of the showroom. Instead, they looked around the boutique as though searching for someone. Richard Lawson entered moments later. The room became completely still. Even customers recognized that someone important had arrived. Vanessa immediately stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson, welcome." He barely acknowledged her. His attention remained focused elsewhere. The smile vanished from Vanessa's face. A hush fell across the showroom. Because in that moment, every person inside the boutique sensed the same thing. The visit was not about the store. It was not about sales. It was not about management. Someone else had brought these people there. And as Richard Lawson continued scanning the room, Abigail quietly turned away from the display she had been examining. The countdown was over. The truth had finally arrived. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The boutique had become so quiet that even the soft music drifting through the ceiling speakers seemed distant. Richard Lawson stood near the entrance scanning the showroom while senior executives waited behind him. Vanessa remained frozen beside the front counter. Her welcoming smile had disappeared completely. She had expected praise, perhaps a surprise inspection, maybe even recognition for the store's performance. What she had not expected was to be ignored. Richard's eyes continued moving across the room until they finally stopped. His expression changed immediately. The tension vanished from his face. A genuine smile appeared. Then something happened that nobody inside the boutique could explain. Richard began walking past Vanessa without a word. Past Brittany. Past Nicole. Past every display and every carefully arranged showroom presentation. He moved directly toward Abigail Carter. A hush fell across the room. Customers stopped browsing. Employees stopped working. Every eye followed him. Abigail turned calmly as Richard approached. "Sorry to keep you waiting," she said. Richard laughed softly. "You have an entire executive team waiting for you. And somehow I still knew you were doing something more important." Several executives behind him smiled. The comment seemed friendly, familiar, and completely unexpected. Vanessa stared in disbelief. Richard extended his hand respectfully. "Good afternoon, Abigail." "Good afternoon, Richard." The room went silent. Not the ordinary silence of confusion. The kind of silence that arrives when reality suddenly stops matching assumptions. Vanessa felt her stomach tighten. Brittany looked at Nicole. Nicole looked back at Brittany. Nobody spoke. Richard turned toward the executives who had accompanied him. "There she is." One by one, the senior leaders approached. Every single person greeted Abigail with obvious respect. Some shook her hand. Others thanked her for making time to visit. One executive even apologized for interrupting her afternoon. Customers began exchanging confused glances. Employees looked as though they had forgotten how to breathe. Vanessa replayed the past hour in her mind. The ignored requests. The dismissive comments. The public embarrassment. Suddenly, every memory felt dangerous. Abigail remained exactly as she had been from the beginning. Calm. Polite. Unimpressed by the attention surrounding her. She asked several questions about the pending corporate meeting while executives answered carefully. The dynamic was impossible to miss. These were powerful people, yet all of them appeared focused on her approval. Richard glanced around the boutique and seemed to notice the atmosphere for the first time. "Everything all right here?" he asked. Abigail paused. For a brief moment, Vanessa hoped she would say yes. Instead, Abigail looked around the showroom thoughtfully. Her eyes moved across the displays, the employees, and the customers who had witnessed everything. "It has been an interesting visit," she replied. "Nothing more. Nothing less." Yet the words landed with tremendous weight. Richard's smile faded. He studied the faces around him. Vanessa suddenly wished she could disappear. The confidence she carried for most of the afternoon was gone. In its place stood uncertainty, fear, regret. Because for the first time, she understood that the woman she had spent an hour dismissing was not an ordinary customer. And as executives continued gathering around Abigail with visible respect, a realization began spreading through the boutique. The most important person in the building had been standing among them the entire time. Nobody had recognized her. Until now, no amount of preparation could have helped Vanessa for what came next. The boutique remained frozen in stunned silence as executives gathered around Abigail Carter. Customers who had spent the afternoon shopping now watched openly. Employees stood motionless behind displays. Nobody wanted to speak first. Nobody wanted to ask the obvious question. Richard Lawson eventually answered it himself. "We should probably head to the conference room," he said respectfully. Abigail glanced around the boutique. "Before we do, I have a question." Richard nodded immediately. "Of course." Abigail gestured gently toward the showroom surrounding them. "How many locations are currently operating under the Carter Retail Group portfolio?" Richard answered without hesitation. "Including the luxury division, 147 locations across 12 states. A visible reaction passed through the room. Several customers exchanged confused looks. Brittany's face lost color. Vanessa felt her pulse quicken. Abigail continued. "And this boutique?" Richard looked surprised by the question. "This location is part of the luxury division." Then he added the detail that changed everything. "Like all luxury division stores, it ultimately reports through your investment group." Nobody moved. The room went silent. Even the soft music seemed to disappear. Vanessa stared at Abigail as though seeing her for the first time. Her mind desperately searched for another explanation. There was none. Abigail was not an important customer. She was not a regional executive. She was not a consultant. She was not a visiting investor. She was one of the people at the very top of the ownership structure. The boutique itself existed inside a business empire she controlled. A hush fell across the showroom. Brittany lowered her eyes. Nicole looked at the floor. Several customers glanced toward Vanessa, suddenly understanding why the atmosphere felt so uncomfortable. Every dismissive comment from the past hour returned at once. The ignored requests, the assumptions, the public embarrassment, the suggestion that she could not afford the merchandise. Vanessa wished she could take back every second. Richard slowly looked around the room. He was an experienced executive. Reading people came naturally to him. It did not take long to realize something had happened before his arrival. "Is there a problem?" he asked quietly. Nobody answered immediately. Abigail could have explained everything. She could have listed every insult, every slight, every moment of disrespect. Instead, she simply spoke the truth. "I spent about an hour shopping here." Richard waited. "And?" Abigail smiled faintly. "I learned a great deal about the customer experience." The statement landed with remarkable force, because everyone understood what she was really saying. Richard's expression became serious. Vanessa felt her stomach drop. Yet Abigail never raised her voice. She never appeared angry. She never demanded punishment. That restraint somehow made the moment even more powerful. One customer near the entrance shook his head quietly. Another woman folded her arms and looked away. The entire boutique seemed trapped inside a lesson nobody had expected to receive. Richard finally nodded. "I understand." His voice had changed. Professional. Careful. The same tone executives use when important decisions are already forming in their minds. Abigail glanced toward the front windows where her dusty pickup truck remained parked between luxury vehicles. Then she looked back at the employees who had judged her because of it. Her expression remained calm. The truth was finally visible. The woman they believed did not belong there had been the most powerful person in the building all along. And now everyone knew it. The conference room meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. Yet by the time it ended, everyone inside the boutique understood that things would never return to the way they had been. Abigail sat at the head of the table beside Richard Lawson while executives reviewed reports and discussed concerns regarding customer experience standards across the luxury division. No one raised their voice. No dramatic confrontations occurred. The atmosphere remained professional. That was what made it so effective. Facts carried enough weight on their own. When the meeting concluded, Abigail returned to the showroom. Employees immediately stood straighter. Conversations stopped. Customers watched quietly. Vanessa remained near the front counter, looking as though she had aged several years during the past hour. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Abigail walked toward her. Every eye followed. Vanessa swallowed hard. "Ms. Carter," she began softly, "I owe you an apology." The words sounded genuine. There was no defense left. No excuses. No attempt to justify what had happened. "I made assumptions about you that I never should have made." Abigail listened calmly. Vanessa lowered her eyes. "I failed to treat you with the respect every customer deserves." The room remained silent. Brittany and Nicole stood nearby, looking equally uncomfortable. Abigail could see the embarrassment on their faces. She could also see something else. Understanding. The lesson had already begun. "Thank you for saying that," Abigail replied. Vanessa looked surprised by the kindness in her voice. Abigail glanced around the boutique. This was never about a handbag or a purchase. Nobody moved. The problem is much larger than that. Richard nodded quietly from several feet away. Abigail continued. A luxury store does not become exceptional because of its products. It becomes exceptional because of how people are treated when they walk through the door. A hush fell across the showroom. Customers listened. Employees listened. Even people who had entered only moments earlier found themselves paying attention. Abigail looked toward the entrance where sunlight streamed through the glass doors. The person wearing work boots deserves the same respect as the person carrying a designer purse. The customer arriving in a pickup truck deserves the same courtesy as the customer arriving in a luxury car. Nobody smiled anymore. The lesson was too important. Abigail's gaze returned to Vanessa. When respect becomes conditional, service stops being professional. The words lingered in the air. Richard stepped forward. Effective immediately, every luxury division location will participate in a new customer experience initiative. Several employees exchanged glances. They understood what that meant. Change was coming. Real change. Not because someone wanted revenge. Because improvement was necessary. Vanessa nodded slowly. She knew her management role would not continue. The decision had already been made during the executive meeting. Yet even then, Abigail never celebrated her downfall. She never humiliated her. She never demanded punishment. Instead, she offered something far more valuable. A chance to learn. As the afternoon sun settled over Dallas, Abigail finally walked toward the exit. The dusty pickup truck still waited outside exactly where she had left it. Before stepping through the doors, she glanced back one final time. The boutique looked different now. Not because the building had changed, because the people inside it had. And that day, everyone learned the same lesson. The most expensive thing in the store had never been displayed behind glass. It was respect. And unlike luxury merchandise, respect costs nothing to give, yet its value is impossible to measure.